Welcome to today's webinar, Rational Investigations in Male Infertility, which will be delivered by two esteemed faculty, Dr. Sujoy Das Gupta from Kolkata and Dr. Saurabh Bhattacharya from Delhi. I, Sankalp Tulshesh from Dr. Lal Path Lab, would like to take the opportunity to introduce our today's speaker first. Let me introduce Dr. Sujoy, who is the first speaker of today's session. Dr. Sujoy is currently working as a consultant reproductive medicine at Genome Fertility Center, Kolkata. Dr. Sujoy is a gold medalist, MBBS and MD. He has completed his DNB from New Delhi. He has also qualified the internationally renowned MRCOG exam from London, as well completed the advanced ART course for clinician from Singapore. He is currently the managing committee member of Bengal Obstetric and Gynecology Society, secretary of Subfertility and Reproductive Endocrinology Committee, convener and faculty at Spectrum MRCOG course, member of Male Infertility Special Interest Group Aspire Singapore. He is also winner of Professor Geoffrey Chamberlain Award at also RCOG World Congress, which was held in London in 2019. So I welcome Dr. Sujoy with so much great credential. I am very sure that we are going to be enlightened with his knowledge and command on the
Thank you so
subject.
much.
So,
Thank you so much for your kind introduction.
thank you, sir. Moving to the next speaker's introduction, I would like to introduce Dr. Saurabh Bhattacharya, who is currently the National Head of Clinical Cytogenomics at Dr. Lal Path Labs. He received his PhD from VIT University in cytogenetics. He has completed his training in clinical cytogenetics from CMC Vellore. He was trained in different cytogenetic techniques from Germany and USA. His primary clinical areas of interest are in prenatal and postnatal chromosome and genomic microarray diagnosis. His research interests include the association of neurodevelopment features with specific copy number changes. I welcome you, Dr. Saurabh Bhattacharya.
Thank you, Sankalp.
Okay, so now without wasting any much of your time, we will directly move to the presentation. My only request to the participant would be that if you have any query or any question which is there during the session, please feel free to type in the chat box. By the end of the session, each and every query will be answered by respective doctors. So over to you, Dr. Sujoy.
So, am I audible? I think.
Yes, sir.
Hello. Okay. So, good evening, everybody. So, basically, we are today we are discussing about the rational investigations in male infertility, because sometimes we feel that male infertility is sometimes underexplored because there is always a tug of war between the gynecologist and the urologist who will treat these patients. But whether whoever wants to treat these patients or not, but we have to admit that in 30% cases, males are solely responsible for infertility, and in another around 40 to 50% cases, they contribute to infertility. Next slide, please. And there are concerns that there is global decline in male sperm parameters, and there are some information and some evidences that sperm parameters are declining. The male infertility is increasing. At the same time, there is increased evidence that the prevalence of certain condition called testicular dysgenesis syndrome, which includes testicular cancer, cryptorchidism, and hypospadias. All these are increasing. So this is really a matter of global concern. Next, please. So you know that WHO different times have published their articles on the standards of semen analysis and the reference ranges. If you see, WHO published their guidelines in 5 times. First in 1980, then 87, 92, 99, and last 2010. So it's our duty to follow the WHO 2010 criteria, because it was the most scientific one out of these 5 because it was based on the around 2000 men living in different continents who became father within 1 year of unprotected intercourse. So next slide, please. So the cutoff value, as you see, has been derived from the basically derived from those the value of those men who have become father within 1 year of unprotected intercourse. Next, please. So whenever we see the semen analysis report, particularly for a busy clinician, it may seem confusing that, okay, oh my God, how I can interpret the semen analysis report. For example, when we are seeing the urine analysis report, we usually don't concentrate on each and every point. So I will say first we have to concentrate on few points to come to the rapid diagnosis. So number one, next please. So number one, we have to see the sperm concentration. If it is more than 15, please remember the latest cutoff of sperm, normal sperm concentration is 15 million per ml. Sometimes we get to see prescription where 40 million sperm concentration was there, and the patient was told that, oh my God, your sperm concentration is too low. Please remember, according to the latest guideline, the sperm concentration cutoff is 15 million. Next, please. If the sperm concentration you have seen, next you have to concentrate on the total motility and the progressive motility. So either total motility should be more than 40% and progressive motility should be more than 32%. Next, please. Next, you have to see the sperm morphology. If you see the sperm morphology more than 4%, that is, if you see that sperm concentration, total motility and sperm morphology, all these are normal, you can essentially ignore other points. But however, if either of them is abnormal, then you have to find out, look into the other things like, next please. Then you have to look into the vitality, particularly if the motility is low, because you have to know whether the non-motile sperms are living or dead sperms. Next please. And please remember, simply by seeing the semen analysis report, you can distinguish between the obstructive and non-obstructive pathology. Because if there is obstruction, semen volume will be low and the pH will be acidic. Because most of the seminal volume, majority of the seminal volume is contributed by the seminal vesicle. So if there is obstruction, the volume will be low. And moreover, please remember the seminal, the secretion of seminal of the prostate is alkaline, and secretion from the seminal vesicle is acidic. So if there is obstructive pathology, the prostatic fluid will be inadequate to buffer the acidic seminal fluid. So in that case, the pH will be acidic. So by seeing all these parameters, so first you have to concentrate on the concentration, motility and morphology. If they are abnormal, then see the vitality and then see the volume and pH. Based on only these features, you can identify whether the semen analysis is abnormal or not, and then you can identify the cause. Next, please. Yeah, next please. So the WHO criteria, according to WHO criteria, you see some of the men who were previously categorized as infertile may now be categorized as fertile, because suppose is a man whose sperm concentration was 18 million per ml was termed as infertile according to WHO 1999 criteria, but now he can be termed as fertile because now the cutoff for normal sperm concentration is only 15 million per ml. Next, please. But we don't know what's the implication of this, whether it means true cutoff or it represents the global decline in male infertility is a matter of debate. We don't know it. Next, please. Next. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah. So there are certain limitations of these WHO semen analysis reports, because remember, even the cutoff was defined as the value of the fifth centile. So remember, even the man whose sperm concentration was 10 million per ml, he was fertile because he fathered the baby within 1 year of intercourse. So it rather defines the male fertility rather than infertility. And moreover, it does not mean that this is the cutoff value and it means something differentiates between the normal and abnormal, but it means the level above or below which you should consider referral to the specialist clinic. Next, please. And unlike other fluids like urine or blood, which are tightly regulated, semen is poorly regulated by our system. So there is semen is notorious for subject to day-to-day variation. So a single semen analysis, if it is abnormal, it has little diagnostic value. So you have to repeat the semen analysis to come to a definite conclusion. Next, please. But remember, it's essential to know from which laboratory you are doing the semen analysis, because this was a publication from USA, which showed that even most of the US laboratories, they did not follow the WHO guideline while reporting the semen analysis. Next, please. And even we have conducted a study. It was published in the Journal of Aspire, that is Fertility Reproduction, in 2019. And we have found that more than 90% laboratories, because this study was based on the laboratories of West Bengal, we found that even most of the IVF laboratories of West Bengal, they do not follow the WHO guideline. So you have to know whether the laboratory from which the semen analysis have been done is authentic or not. Next, please. See this semen analysis report. See, the sperm concentration is 23 million per ml, they have mentioned. On the other hand, they have, in the reference level, they have mentioned it's 20 million per ml. Whereas they diagnose this condition as oligospermia. So this is the condition of the laboratory report. So next, please. So you have to know from which laboratory you are doing the report. Next, please. Next, yeah. So ideal semen analysis report should look like this, because this should contain all the necessary information, particularly concentration, motility, morphology, volume, pH, vitality, everything, and the proper diagnosis and the proper reference value as per WHO 2010 standard. Next, please. So even when there is normozoospermia, for example, a man is having normozoospermia, does that mean everything is normal within this man regarding the fertility? Next, please. Remember, even if semen analysis is normal, it tells little about the function of the functional capacity of different male or reproductive organs and cells, different organs and glands and ducts of the male reproductive cells. And moreover, nowadays, what we are more concerned about the functional capacity of the sperm, because sometimes we see that the sperm is absolutely normal, but at the time of IVF of ICSI, we found that sperm is not capable of fertilizing the eggs. So normal semen analysis report does not mean the normal fertilizing capacity of the sperm. So there are certain factors. Number one, next please. Number one is the immunological factors. We probably all know about the anti-sperm antibody. This is a concept because this can develop, because you know the testicular antigen is, because the sperms develop only after you attain the adulthood, that is after the puberty. So just like the lens in the eye, testicles are protected, they are immunologically privileged site. So if there is any break in the blood testis barrier, there will be, the sperm will come in contact with the blood and there will be anti-sperm antibodies. And it has been found that 10% of these men who are undergoing infertility evaluation or IVF, they can harbor the anti-sperm antibody. On the other hand, quote-unquote unexplained infertility, where we find that everything is normal, in 42% cases, anti-sperm antibody may be present. However, even in normal fertile men, 2% cases, it may be there. So they are most common type of antibodies, anti-sperm antibodies, are IgA and IgG. Remember, the fertilization rate may be affected by the prevalence of anti-sperm antibodies. So from the next slide, I will request Dr. Saurabh to take over and discuss the laboratory aspects of the anti-sperm antibody. Dr. Saurabh, please. Next slide, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Sujay. So I'll be discussing about different anti-sperm antibodies tests which are available. The first one is agglutination test, complement dependent test, immunoglobulin binding test, mixed antiglobulin reaction and immunobeat test, and ELISA test. And there are some other tests which includes flow cytometry based test. But I'll be talking about ELISA here because this is a very common test being done in all over the world and which is very commonly available. So ELISA is, we know that ELISA is very widely used in all the labs for different types of conditions, and the principle is same. So we have to take multi-well plate, and the plate will be magnified, and there will be antibodies attached to the well. There will be, after we put sample there, the antibody antigen interaction will happen, and then enzyme linked antibody will be there, which tagged with a substrate, and this substrate, after being reacted with enzyme antibody, and antigen reaction, they will show a color. So this color will be evaluated, and then we can check the concentration. So what are the advantage of this test? The advantage is very well specific and quantitative. So we can actually quantify the exact antibody concentration, whereas the disadvantage is the time and the cost, poor sensitivity, and inability to determine ASA location and isotype. But still it is being widely used because this is very easy to use in all the labs. Next slide, please. Yeah, over to Dr. Sujay for sperm DNA fragmentation details.
So now another issue is, apart from this sperm antibody test, I mentioned that when that sperm's semen analysis is absolutely normal, one concern is that it does not tell anything about the sperm antibody. Next one is sperm DNA fragmentation, and we see there are certain conditions where the sperm DNA is likely to be damaged, because you know that the sperm DNA is very compacted, it's contained in the head region of the sperm. So the sperm DNA fragmentation can happen with increased paternal age, improper diet, like we'll discuss later about the imbalance between the oxidants and antioxidants, certain drug abuse, tobacco use, environmental factors like pollution, pesticide exposure. Varicocele is one of the important factors causing the DNA damage. Systemic disease like diabetes and different rheumatological diseases. And one of the most important things is the genital inflammation, like particularly tuberculosis, mumps. All these can be responsible for sperm DNA fragmentation. Next slide, please. Over to Dr. Saurabh.
Yeah. So this is ASHRAE recommendation that sperm DNA fragmentation test is a routine test in investigating a couple with recurrent pregnancy losses. So I'll be discussing about that how sperm, next slide please. I'll be discussing about the sperm DNA fragmentation in a little bit detailed way, because we have just launched this test in our lab and getting a very good response. So what we are going to check, so DNA fragmentation means we have to check the DNA structures, so defects in DNA structures, and these are the four basic defects what we find in a DNA. So first one is single strand break, where there is a single strand break occurs. Double strand DNA break, where both the strands has been broken. Then base deletion and modification in single base, whether it is ATGC, and then inter or intra-strand cross linkages. So these are the four basic defects found in sperm when there is a fragmentation occurs. Next slide, please. Yeah, so sperm DNA fragmentation and infertility, why to bother? So why it is important? So if you see this chart, there are multiple studies happen in last 2 decades using two basic technology. One is sperm chromatin structure assay, and second one is tunnel assay. There is SCD, which is sperm chromatin dispersion assay, and one more study which has been done using COMET assay. So these are the four important and very commonly used assays all over the world, but SC assay and tunnel assay is widely used. In our laboratory also we are using tunnel assay. I'll be discussing about tunnel. So if you see, there are different cutoff points. So these cutoff points being established after a certain validation from different lab and different study group. The basic idea is to establish a cutoff, and if you find the abnormal sperms out of this cutoff, it will be indicating about a pregnancy failure, whether it is pregnancy with IUI, pregnancy with IVF or ICSI. There are different studies which has been shown the same. Next slide, please. So what is the impact of IVF outcome and SDF? So there were multiple studies done so far, and this is the largest study which I found in a literature, that there were 16 studies with 2,969 patients, couples who were undergoing IVF and ICSI have shown a high sperm DNA damage. So it is now known that higher the sperm DNA damage, the more chances of getting failure in IVF and ICSI is there. So we have to be very careful, and we have to check for the sperm DNA fragmentation before going for IVF or ICSI. Next slide, please. So what is happening? So if you see in the right hand side, the cartoon shows that there is a DNA which there are certain exons there, and we know that exons are coding regions of DNA. So they are responsible for making a protein which will function in the way where our body or our system will work properly. But if there is a deletion in this particular exon, the abnormal protein will form and form a disease. So depending on the intensity of damage in the sperm DNA, how many exons, the active exons have been lost, will cause a more severity in a disease. Next slide, please. So what are the key messages here? So sperm DNA fragmentation give different information with that than routine semen analysis. As Dr. Dasgupta has already mentioned, that only doing semen analysis is not enough. We have to go further and check even, this is very important, tests like sperm DNA fragmentation for better prognostic value. Sperm DNA fragmentation is mainly oxidative stress mediated during sperm transit through epididymis, and more SDF or sperm DNA fragmentation, the more value of sperm DNA fragmentation, the more poor is ART outcome, and there is a chances of miscarriages. So reproductive outcome related to oocyte repair capacity as well as severity and site of DNA damage is also directly correlated with sperm DNA fragmentation. Next slide, please. So these are the methods, the basic method. These are the three basic methods being used all over the world for sperm DNA fragmentation. I've already told you that tunnel assay, SC assay, and SCD comet assay. So these are the very commonly done in all the labs all over the world. But basically there are three: direct method, which use the examples are tunnel assay and ISNT, Nick translation assay. Indirect assays are SC assay and sperm chromatin dispersion test, and then comet assay. And there are chromatin compaction assay, which use a nuclear proteins like aniline blue and toluidine blue. Next slide, please. I'll be discussing only one because this will take lots of time to discuss all the techniques, but this is very commonly done and we are also doing it in our lab. So tunnel is terminal deoxynucleotide transferase, DUTP nick and labeling test. So which forms tunnel, TUNEL. This is enzymatic addition of modified nucleotides to DNA breaks. So how it is worked? So if you see there is a DNA from the sperm, and if there is a break occurs there, we have to add DUTP, which is tagged with TDT enzyme. And this enzyme goes and tag up in a place where there is a DNA break, and we have to check the intensity. If you check the picture, so different kits or different manufacturers give different stains. So few manufacturers gives a red color stain, few gives a green color stain. We use a kit which shows a green color stain, and the arrow shows the damaged DNA cells. So damaged sperm cells. So you can directly check the DNA damage out of the cells in a microscope, under the microscope. And this is based in a fluorescent microscopy. Next slide, please. This is a very interesting picture. So if you see that in the right hand side, there are two sperms. N indicates a normal sperm. So doing only simple sperm analysis and checking the structure is not enough. So normal sperm, which is looking very normal, is actually a damaged cells. If you see the left hand side, the green colored cell is a damaged sperm cell. And same way, if you see the bottom picture, the left hand side green color shows an abnormal sperm, and the N indicates the normal sperm, which is not being colored with the green fluorescent dye. So this is the way we have to check the tunnel positive cells. Next slide, please. Okay, so once we check the cells, we have to calculate the DFI, also called as DNA fragmentation index. So this formula being used to calculate the DFI. So there are number of tunnel negative morphologically normal sperm divided by total number of sperm cells evaluated multiplied by 100. So this will give us a percentage of abnormal sperm or DFI percentage. And in this, in the bottom, if you see, there is a table indicate that less than or equal to 15% of DFI indicates there is outstanding to sound sperm. So the normal person who is fertile should have 15% or less DFI. 15 to 25% indicates best to good sperm. 25 to 50 shows good to weak sperm, and greater than 50% DFI is exceptionally poor sperm DNA credibility. So ICSI treatment is more likely to result in better than IUI and IVF if DFI value is more than 30%. Next slide, please. Yeah, over to Dr. Sujay, please.
So basically what Dr. Saurabh has mentioned in detail. So I will summarize clinical aspects of both in vivo and in vitro. There are certain strategies how we can improve it, and antioxidant therapies, although they are not very much effective in improving the sperm DNA fragmentation. Subclinical infections, whether it should be treated or not, is a matter of debate. We'll see it later on. Next is the varicocele repair. Again, there are controversies. We'll discuss this later on. And sometimes TESA, because Dr. Saurabh has nicely mentioned, in most cases, the sperm DNA fragmentation happens when the sperms are going through the epididymis. So if we can collect the sperms before they are going through the epididymis, that is by TESA, testicular sperm aspiration, there are some authors, some proponents who claim that testicular sperms contain less amount of DNA damage than the ejaculated sperm, because ejaculated sperm has to come through the long way. So these are ways how we can bypass the sperm DNA fragmentation. At the same time, iatrogenic damage should be avoided, like short abstinence period, and the laboratory over-centrifugation sometimes can cause DNA damage. And of course, Dr. Saurabh has mentioned that X is the primary choice of treatment if the sperm DNA fragmentation, the DFI is more than 30%. However, we still don't know whether if these DNA damaged sperms are at all able to fertilize, because whether these sperms will be fertilized or not depends on the DNA repairing capacity of the oocytes. Because please remember, if the female age is relatively low, if the female partner is younger, then she can manage the fertilization, and the good quality of embryo can be formed even with very badly damaged sperm, with very badly damaged DNA. But the opposite things will happen when the female's age is more than 35. So the next slide, please. Now we'll discuss about something like pus cells in semen. Next, please. So see this semen analysis report. You can agree that this is quite normal. Next, please. Next, please. But see, next, please. The pus cell is 12 to 14. So you must agree that there is something abnormal, or we call it pyozoospermia. Next, please. Next. So what to do? Okay. Number one is antibiotics. We often have temptation to give antibiotics empirically, but remember, there are studies to show that empirical antibiotics can actually be harmful. So give antibiotics only when there is documented evidence of infection as shown by culture. And next thing is that method of collection is important. If the hand washing is not there sometimes, so there may be some impurities. And particularly if the man collected the sperm by coitus interruptus, some vaginal cells may be coming inside, and it may look like pus cell. So hand collection is important before the hand, as well as the man should wash the penis before collecting the semen. And please remember, ideally all pus cells do not mean round cell. In the sperms, in the semen, there are certain types of round cells like pus cell, the progenitor spermatogonial cells, and lastly the epithelial cells shed from the male genital tract. So there are special tests like peroxidase tests which can differentiate between the round cell and pus cells. So ideally the lab should mention whether the round cells are pus cells or not. And again, to see the infection, whether there is infection or not, you have to take the history, you have to do the culture, and even sometimes culture may be negative, but if there is persistent presence of pus cells in the semen, despite the fact that culture is negative, you have to consider the prostatic message, because sometimes there may be prostatic infection. And please remember, in our experience, we have found that sometimes the reason for increased pus cell is simple phimosis, because we have found that many adult men, they are suffering from phimosis, but they don't know that they are suffering from the phimosis. So clinical examination is also important in this case. Next, please. So according to the guideline published by the European Urology Association, whether the pus cell in semen has any significance or not is not known. It may be associated with infection, but does not always mean infection. It may be found in more number in the men with prostatitis. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah. However, even if you remember even if you treat the prostatitis or urethritis with antibiotics, you can eradicate the infection, but sometimes the post-infective sequelae of infection can be there. So antibiotic can improve the sperm parameter, but it has not been translated into improvement of pregnancy. Having said that, if there is documented infection of gonorrhea or chlamydia, you should treat both the partners aggressively, because you know that these are risk factors for development of PID, pelvic inflammatory disease, in the female partner. Next, please. Now, mild male factor. Next, please. So what is mean by mild male factor? Please see this semen analysis report. See, almost everything is normal except that the sperm concentration is slightly low. Next, please. So this is called a case of mild male factor. Next please. That is mild oligozoospermia or oligospermia. Next please. So what is the definition of mild male factor? We exactly don't know what is meant by mild. Some people define mild male factor as the sperm concentration of 5 million per ml, but the better definition is based on total motile sperm count, that is sperm concentration into total volume of semen into total motility. And various authors have defined this mild male factor in different ways based on TMSC. Some define more than 5 million is the mild male factor, some define more than 10, some define more than 20. So it's still a matter of controversy. Next please. So this article showed that total motile sperm count is a better indicator of classification of male factor fertility rather than individual parameters like sperm concentration and motility. Next please. So in case of mild male factors, usually investigations are not recommended. You can give antioxidants. Clomiphene and other adjuvants are commonly prescribed, but their role is not very much evidence based. Next please. So regarding antioxidants, you know in the body there is always a tug of war between the oxidant and the antioxidant. And basically, next please. Antioxidants, they are basically the free radicals which have at least one unpaired electron in their outer orbit, and these radicals have a tendency to stabilize themselves by getting the additional electron. So as a result, the free radical mediated damage happens in the body. But what's about antioxidant, which is very much rampant in our clinical practice? Next please. One study, this is the study, the 2 to 3 study, that is Phases trial and Moxie trials. They are studies published recently. They did not find any beneficial role of antioxidant. However, one systematic review found that there may be some role, but still there is need of further studies. On the other hand, next please, the Cochrane review found that, next please, the quality of evidence is extremely low. However, antioxidants may improve the live birth rate and may improve the clinical pregnancy rate, and there is no evidence that antioxidant increases the risk of miscarriage, but there is increased evidence that this may be associated with gastrointestinal side effect. So overall, the current evidence is inconclusive. That is, you can give antioxidant, but we should not rely overtly on antioxidant, because sometimes we get to see the prescriptions where the man is taking antioxidant years after years. This should not be done. Why? We'll be seeing later on. Next please. Mild male factor infertility, when to repeat the semen analysis? It should be repeated after 3 months at least, because you know the sperm production, the cycle of sperm production is 3 months. On the other hand, if there is severe male factor infertility or azoospermia, we should repeat it as soon as possible. In that case, we should not wait for 3 months. Next please. Now, commonly we advise IUI as treatment of oligospermia. Now, when to do it? Please see the total motile sperm count. Usually the reports from IVF labs, they give total motile sperm count. Otherwise, you can calculate it. That is sperm concentration into volume into motility. If it is more than 5 to 10 million, then IUI gives very good results. You can do maximum 4 to 6 cycle IUI. On the other hand, if it is less than 5 million, ideal treatment is called something like ICSI or IVF. So if the man still insists on going for IUI, you can do the IUI after counseling. At the time of IUI, what you can do, you can ask the man to give sample twice, if possible, because it has been found that sometimes a double ejaculate, that is the second ejaculate, can contain the better quality of sperms having better motility and morphology. And next is that you prepare the semen, because you know IUI, we have to prepare in IUI, you have to prepare the semen. After washing, see the inseminating motile sperm count. If the inseminating motile sperm count is more than 1 million, even if this IUI fails, you can do further 3 to 4 cycles of IUI. On the other hand, if you find that inseminating motile sperm count is less than 1 million, then you have to see the morphology. Next please. If the morphology is less than 4%, you should not do IUI, rather you have to do ICSI in the next cycle. Now next question is, suppose a couple has come to you and there is mild male factor, you are planning for IUI. Whether the tubal factor should be judged before IUI, the tubal factor for the female partner should be judged yes or no. The recommendation is that in absence of any risk factors for tubal abnormalities like POD, previous ectopic pregnancy, endometriosis or previous pelvic surgery, you can do 3 cycles of IUI. If that fails, then check the tubal factors. On the other hand, in presence of such risk factors, you should check the tubal factor by HSG or SSG. And interestingly, this study has found that in a couple with severe male factor infertility, usually the tubal factor is normal. So basically, it's the nature protection that double pathology usually does not coexist usually. Next, please. So I will advise everybody, if possible, please go through this article, this essay recommendation on IUI. This is very pleasurable to read. This guideline. You can get a very clear idea about IUI, when to do and what to do. Next, please. Now I will request Dr. Saurabh to take over for this next slide regarding the laboratory aspects of oxidative stress.
Yes, so I'll be talking about the laboratory testing for oxidative stress now. So there are traditional oxidative stress laboratory techniques which includes direct and indirect assessments are available. And if you see this table, it can show that what are the direct method and what are the indirect method. So direct method very commonly used is chemiluminescence assay, nitroglycerin, cytochrome C reduction test, FIT-C, electron spin, resonance. And indirect methods includes myeloperoxidase or ENDS test, lipid peroxidation levels, chemokines, antioxidants using micronutrients, vitamins, antioxidants, TAC, and there is a DNA damage. So direct method very commonly used for oxidative stress is chemiluminescence assay. So I'll be talking about chemiluminescence here. Next slide, please. So this is basically a cartoon shows that how most of the luminometer looks like. So this is the luminometer with the machine which emits light, and then the concentration of the sample can be checked with the help of computer data. Next slide. And how to set up the tubes for reactive oxygen species measurement. So we have to take a semen sample, the fresh semen sample, and it has to be examined for volume, color, and pH. We have to perform ENDS test, myeloperoxidase test, and then computer-assisted semen analysis. So to check the motility of the sperm and the structure of the sperm. After this, we have to liquefy or dilute the sperm sample and divide into 4 different groups. The first group will be always blank, which includes only PBS, saline solution. Second group will have a negative control with PBS and luminol solution, which helps to measure the luminescence. And third group will be a test sample, which includes a sperm sample along with 400 microliter of sperm sample along with the luminol solution, 10 microliter. And the fourth group will have a positive control with luminol sample and hydrogen peroxide. So we know that hydrogen peroxide will make a difference. It will show a high value. That's why it is considered as a positive control. And the reference value for normal ROS obtained by this method is calculated as less than 102 relative light units per second per 10 to the power 6 sperms per ml. So likewise, we have to calculate the reactive oxygen species of the sample. Next slide, please. Over to Dr. Sujay.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Saurabh. Next slide, please. Next slide, yeah. Please see the semen analysis report. See, the sperm concentration is low, the motility is low, and the morphology is also abnormal. Next, please. So we can say this is a case of severe male factor infertility. Next, please. In this case, as I already discussed, if there is severe male factor, you have to see the volume and the pH. See, the volume is normal and pH is not so normal. So we are probably dealing with some non-obstructive pathology. So probably there is some testicular pathology. That is, there is some the testicular failure. That is, testes are not able to produce the enough quality of sperms and enough quantity of sperm. So that's why there is like severe male factor. Next, please. Next slide. But in severe male factor, remember, don't ignore this severe male factor, because it has been found that in 25% cases of severe male factor infertility, if you don't treat them, they will land up in having azoospermia over the period of 6 to 12 months. Just like the case of the inadequate ovarian reserve, or like poor ovarian reserve, where if you don't treat these women, they can land up in premature menopause. Similarly, if you ignore this type of men having severe male factor infertility and you prescribe antioxidants months after months, they can sometimes land up in having azoospermia. So, next please. So antioxidant, first of all, we have to remember that sometimes we get to see prescriptions where there is male factor and the donor sperm was prescribed as only one option. But please remember, donor sperm is not the only solution. Because if you advise donor sperm and you do not give any option, it's the serious violation of patient's autonomy. You have to give all the options. Then according to their affordability and considering the pros and cons, let them take the decision. So donor sperm is not the solution. And again, you can give antioxidant, but please don't rely on antioxidant and don't think that after giving antioxidant for 3 months, in case of severe male factor, you will get normal sperm count. So if you think that the man is not in the position to afford ICSI right now, you offer sperm freezing so that at the time of ICSI, you can use the frozen sperm. And of course, it's very much important to investigate the cause. And of course, you know, in these cases where there is severe male factor, ICSI is the treatment of choice. And there are some evidences, some emerging evidences, just like as I mentioned in case of sperm DNA fragmentation. When you find severe male factor and on the day of ICSI you find that the sperm quality is extremely poor compared to number of eggs you get, you think that the quality of quantity and quality of sperms are not adequate, then you can consider aspirating sperm from the testicle in extreme cases. Next please. So, it has been found that when there is azoospermia or sperm concentration less than 1 million per ml, it's likely that you can get some obstruction or some chromosomal abnormality if you thoroughly investigate the man. So, in this case, next please, for all practical purpose, if the sperm concentration is less than 5 million per ml, you have to investigate. Now, how you can investigate? Next please. So you have to take the history. The lifestyle changes are important. What discuss about the profession and other things, and you have to take the medical history, because sometimes we have found that undiagnosed diabetes is a risk factor for azoospermia, and we have found a man who fathered baby before, but now they have come with azoospermia. On examination and further investigation, we found that suppose the HbA1c is more than 8%. So please don't forget to look for the diabetes, and mumps, you know, is a common cause of mumps orchitis is a common cause of male factor infertility, and of course cancer treatment. Surgical history is important. I will show you a case, the past history of hernia, orchidopexy, pituitary surgery, because sometimes if you don't ask, patient may not be able to tell you. Drug history, sometimes you get to see the man with rheumatoid arthritis or ankylosing spondylosis taking the sulfasalazine, and it may be responsible for oligospermia. And of course, sexual history is important, because if there is erectile dysfunction and low libido, it can indicate the testosterone deficiency. The next, please. Next slide, please. This is an interesting case. I uploaded it with kind written permission from the patient. This patient was referred to me for doing the testicular sperm aspiration because he was having azoospermia. On further history, asking history, he said that he underwent 2 types of operation before, and since birth he did not have any testicle in the scrotum. On examination, we found that, you see, there are 2 types of marks, because the testicles were initially found to be inside the abdomen and they were removed. So you find that beneath the penis there is nothing. So there is empty scrotum. So that's why we abandoned the procedure of TESA, and we said that unfortunately we cannot do anything for you. You have to go for donor sperm. So history taking is important. Next, please. Now, physical examination. Sometimes we feel that the physicians are feeling very shaky in examining the man with having the male factor infertility. But it's very much important to find out the cause. So you have to see the general body habitus, because sometimes Klinefelter syndrome, you know, there may be acromegaly. Secondary sex character, gynecomastia, these are important. And you have to check the testicular size and consistency. If you have Pallitz's orchidometer, nothing can be better than this. And varicocele, please remember the diagnosis of varicocele is always clinical. You ask the man to stand, you should examine the man in standing position and ask the man to cough and then see and palpate for the varicocele, because diagnosis of varicocele should be clinical, it's not radiological or sonological. And it's important to feel that male infertility is a forerunner of serious diseases like diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and cancer. Next slide, please. And remember, the low semen quality, the poor semen quality may be an early indication for testicular cancer. This is one of our case. Again, I uploaded it with kind permission from this patient. This patient had azoospermia and he was told to undergo donor sperm insemination. He came to me after 4 cycles of failed IUI. Now on examination, I found that there was testicular swelling. On further ultrasound examination, it was found to be a solid testicular mass, and then the patient was referred to oncologist, and it was diagnosed to be a case of malignant teratoma, and the patient underwent chemotherapy. So remember, male infertility is a risk factor for testicular cancer, and sometimes we forget these couples after they are having child. Okay, so you have to tell the person that you are at risk of testicular cancer and other cardiovascular disease. So you have to take precaution, you have to do lifestyle changes to prevent the cardiovascular disease. And another important thing we must not forget is the self-testicular examination. Next slide, please. Okay, now investigation. What investigation we should do? It again depends on the type of non-obstructive or obstructive pathology. As I have said, from the clinical examination and from the semen analysis, you can get a clue whether you are dealing with non-obstructive pathology or obstructive pathology. If non-obstructive pathology, you have to, these tests are mandatory, like FSH, LH, testosterone and sugar. And genetic testing, if you are thinking that you are dealing with some non-obstructive pathology, karyotyping and Y chromosome microdeletion should be done. On the other hand, if you are thinking that there are congenital bilateral absence of vas difference, in that case, CFTR, that is cystic membrane transmembrane receptor gene testing should be done. We'll come to it later on. Now, ultrasound scrotum. Sometimes we see that every man with abnormal sperm count are advised ultrasound examination. But please remember, this is not the correct way. We have to do ultrasound only when it is indicated or when it will add value to our clinical workup. Like when there is clinically abnormal things like epididymal or testicular abnormality. Secondly, some men may have tight scrotum, that is very strong trimesteric reflex. It's very difficult to palpate the scrotal content in some men, particularly in the winter season when the testicles are getting in the higher position. Next is the post-mumps orchitis in mums, because there is something like testicular microlithiasis, which is a forerunner of testicular cancer. So if a man is having atrophic testes, or if a man who had mumps orchitis, you should look for testicular microcalcification, which is also called testicular microlithiasis, because these are the forerunners of testicular cancer. But remember, it should not be done for varicocele detection, where we'll be discussing now. And transrectal ultrasound is an important tool. It should be done when you are suspecting some obstructive pathology to look into the seminal vesicles and the prostate, because it's very difficult to understand this by clinical examination. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah. No, the previous one, please. Yeah, thank you. So when you are dealing with severe oligoasthenoteratozoospermia or azoospermia, see the volume of pH and the semen. If they are normal, and along with low testicular volume, because testicular pathology is usually, but not always, is associated with low testicular volume. In that case, as I mentioned, FSH, LH, testosterone and blood sugar are mandatory. Prolactin and TSH should be done when clinically indicated, like when there is history of or clinical suspicion of thyroid disorder, or when there is low libido or erectile dysfunction. Now, if the FSH is high and LH is normal or high, in that, and testosterone is normal or low, you should do karyotyping and Y chromosome microdeletion. Now the question is, can it happen that only the FSH is high and the LH is normal and the testosterone is normal? Yes, it can happen, because in testicle there are two compartments. One is endocrine compartment, consists of the Leydig cells, which secretes the testosterone and which is under control by pituitary LH. And another is the spermatogenetic component, that is the seminiferous tubules, which are under control by FSH. So if only the spermatogenesis is impaired, but the testosterone production is normal, then you will find normal testosterone and normal LH, but the FSH will be abnormal. Next, please. On the other hand, if you find FSH and LH low and testosterone low, that means you are dealing with some pituitary pathology. In that case, pituitary imaging should be done to rule out pituitary micro or macroadenoma. Next, please. On the other hand, if you find that testosterone is high and FSH LH low, that means it can be an indication of anabolic steroid abuse. So don't forget the possibility of anabolic steroid abuse. Usually these men are well masculinized. They have very well-grown beard, mustache. There is no gynecomastia. But testicular size is low, and you find the testosterone is high. On the other hand, FSH LH is low. So they are probably, particularly the athletes, they are at risk of anabolic steroid abuse. So it should be kept in mind. Next, please. Next possibility is when the volume or pH is low, fructose is negative. Sorry, I forgot to mention about fructose, but all labs do not mention about fructose in their semen analysis report. If you find fructose is positive, that means probably there is no obstruction. On the other hand, if there is fructose negative, because fructose is produced by the seminal vesicle, so you can suspect ejaculatory duct obstruction. So in that case, if you think that if you are dealing with obstructive pathology, do the ultrasound like scrotal ultrasound and transrectal ultrasound. And if you think that you are dealing with some like bilateral absence of vas deferens, in that case, CFTR gene testing should be done. Next, please. Now, in this case, this is a real case. Suppose a man has come with severe male factor infertility. Previous one, yeah. See, the FSH is elevated, LH is elevated, but testosterone is low. Would you like to give testosterone in this case or not? Next, please. So there is a temptation to give testosterone. We think that testosterone is low, so you have to replace testosterone. But please remember, if you give exogenous testosterone from outside, it will not penetrate the blood-testis barrier. On the other hand, this testosterone will exert feedback inhibition on the pituitary FSH and LH. As a result, there will be secondary hypogonadism, that is pituitary shutdown will happen. As a result, testicle will stop their functioning, and as a result, there will be even the sperm count will be even lower, and the man may land up in azoospermia. So the recommendation is that testosterone supplementation should only be done in men who are not interested in fertility. In men in the reproductive age group who are interested in further fertility, even when testosterone is low, please, please, please do not supplement testosterone in these cases. This is the dictum. Next, please. But what can you do? Can you check for female hormone estrogen in male? Yes. See the estradiol level. If you find that testosterone to estradiol ratio is less than 10, in which unit it should be less than 10? Measure the testosterone in nanogram per DL and the estradiol in the picogram per ml. If you find that the ratio is less than 10:1, then you have to give aromatase inhibitor. It can work in dramatic manner, and we have also found very good results with aromatase inhibitors in these cases, because it will simply block the conversion of testosterone to estradiol. So the estradiol level will be lowered and the testosterone level will be higher. So in this way, you can boost up the endogenous testosterone level without supplementing testosterone from outside. Next, please. And this is a meta-analysis showing that aromatase inhibitor can improve different sperm parameters. Next, please. So as I have said, ultrasound scrotum should not be done to detect subclinical varicocele. What is subclinical varicocele? Next, please. Now see, this is a real case report. A 34-year-old army man who came with primary infertility. He is having total asthenospermia. That is, not a single sperm was motile. He was a smoker, but after our advice, he stopped smoking. On the day of, he had varicocele on ultrasound examination, but on clinical examination, there was no varicocele. He was advised varicocelectomy, but we advised against the varicocelectomy, and we advised ICSI, but on the day of ICSI, unfortunately, we found that all the sperms in the ejaculated semen were of very poor morphology. So we offered the TESA, and the man readily accepted the TESA. So we collected the sperms from the testicles, and ICSI was done. And his wife conceived in the first cycle of IVF ICSI, and she is continuing the pregnancy. Next, please. So, varicocele can be of different types. Number one is subclinical, that is which is diagnosed only by ultrasound, and this subclinical varicocele should not be treated. That's why you should not do ultrasound just to diagnose the subclinical varicocele. Ultrasound should be done to confirm when you have varicocele clinically. That is, clinical varicocele is of 3 grades, grade 1, 2, 3. Grade 3 is which can be palpable only during Valsalva maneuver. Next, grade 2, which is palpable at rest, even when the man is not doing Valsalva maneuver, but it's not visible. Grade 3 is when you ask the man to remove his dress and you see the man's scrotum from a distance and you see that there is some boggy swelling above the testicle, and this is grade 3 varicocele. Next, please. So the varicocele surgery should be done only when all these criteria are met. That is, number 1, ipsilateral testiculus size is small. That is, on the side of varicocele, the testicle is of smaller size compared to the other size. That is, there is significant discrepancy in the size of the testicles. Number 2, when there is male factor infertility, but there is good chance that this couple can conceive naturally, that is, there is absence of female factor infertility and there should not be very serious male factor infertility. And number 3 is that there is clinical, that is grade 2 and grade 3 varicocele. Subclinical varicocele should not be treated because it can do more harm than good. Next, please. Another interesting thing we often find in clinical infertile men is the epididymal cells in the scrotal ultrasound or on when clinical examination. This man, again I have taken this picture after kind written permission from this patient. He's an IT professional. He came with the oligoasthenoteratospermia. Ultrasound showed a epididymal cyst, and clinically also we found a large epididymal cyst. He was having uncontrolled diabetes, but when we advise controlling the diabetes and we send the man for surgery to the urologist, meanwhile his wife conceived naturally. Next, please. Next, please. But remember, the question is whether the epididymal cyst should be treated or not in an infertile male. The indication of epididymal cyst is only when the cyst is becoming large within short period of time or when there is pain. Otherwise, the treatment of epididymal cyst will not improve the fertility. Rather, surgical treatment can further cause damage to the epididymis and it can lower the fertility. So, epididymal cyst should be treated only when it is clinically indicated. Only infertility is not the indication for treatment of epididymal cyst. Next, please. And again, this is the ultrasound report of a man having mumps orchitis. You see, there are testicular microcalcification. Next, please. So, in this case, as I have mentioned, it's important to advise the man the self-testicular examination. That is just like self-breast examination. The man should be taught at least once a month. He should examine his testicles in front of the mirror, preferably after a shower bath, particularly when there are atrophic testicles, when there is history of undescended testicle and the man underwent orchidopexy, and when there is ultrasound evidence of testicular microcalcification. So the man should be advised self-testicular examination, and when if he finds something abnormal in that case, he should consult the doctor immediately. Next, please. Now the next case is about obstructive azoospermia. Next, please. So see this semen analysis report, azoospermia. Now see, next slide please. Volume is low, pH is low. So this is a case of obstructive azoospermia. Next please. So when you find that the semen volume is low, before jumping in the diagnosis of obstructive azoospermia, you have to check the abstinence period, because sometimes short abstinence period may be associated with less amount of volume. As the completeness of collection, sometimes there may be spill outside the container, so it can erroneously lead to low volume. Next, ask the man about the usual amount of ejaculate. Men are very much sensitive about the volume of ejaculate, so they are usually able to tell you about the usual amount of semen at other time of discharge. Exclude retrograde ejaculation by doing the post-masturbation urine, and it's done in most of the laboratories, the post-masturbation urine testing. Next is that you have to exclude if there is you suspect some obstructive pathology, then go for TRAS, that is transrectal ultrasound. Next please. Next. So Remember, when you encounter a case of azoospermia, the man can become the biological father using his own sperm. The chance of sperm retrieval from his own organs is around 100% when there is obstructive pathology. Unfortunately, when there is non-obstructive pathology, the chance is 30 to 80% depending on the type of the pathology. So from testes, we can do by TESA, which is non-invasive, or by TC, that is testicular sperm extraction, by which we have to make a small cut. And nowadays there is another entity like micro TC, that is under microscope we can do the TC. Next one is PESA, that is percutaneous epididymal sperm aspiration, which can be done in obstructive cases from the epididymis, or sometimes microsurgical extraction can be done from the epididymis. The next list, please. Next slide. Now this is a case of, this real case, a man having bilateral, congenital bilateral absence of vas deferens. And you see, I don't know whether you are able to see the slide or not. On the transrectal ultrasound, it is shown that his both seminal vesicles are absent. So this was a case of CBAVD, that is congenital bilateral absence of vas deferens. So in this case, next please, we have done the cystic fibrosis testing. But remember, cystic fibrosis testing is costly. So in this case, we have performed the trial TESA, that is we inserted the needle inside the testicle and collected the sperms. After we made it sure that sperms were obtained from the man, then we advised the test for cystic fibrosis transmembrane gene receptor, and this is the test which showed that the minus negative for this mutation. So after that, this man now is planning for going for ICSI. Over to Dr. Saurabh, please.
Thank you, Dr. Sujay. Next slide, please. Yes, so CFTR or cystic fibrosis transmembrane receptor mutations is very important to check if there is a indication. So about 98% of males affected with cystic fibrosis are infertile. That is very important point to note. And there are multiple clinical features being distributed throughout for male and female. For male, like atrophy, fibrose, or congenital absence of vas deferens, also called as CAVD. Female has reduced fertility, thickened, dehydrated mucus in the cervix. So 1 to 2% of male infertility and 6% of obstructive azoospermia will show a mutation in CFTR gene. So if you see the chromosome map in the right hand side, it is CFTR gene is located in the chromosome 7 and in the long arm, which is also called as Q arm, at the location 7q31.2. Next slide, please. So how this is being performed? So this is being performed with the multiple molecular based tests like PCR based test. Now next gen sequencing is also available, and simply Sanger sequencing is also okay. If we have developed the test, we can definitely check CFTR mutation. And delta F508 deletion is the most common cause of cystic fibrosis, and that is what is available with us right now. What is happening here is CFTR sequence, if you see, in the green color, you can see the nucleotide sequence, ATC, ATC, TTT, GGT, and GTT. And corresponding amino acids are also located at the bottom. So what is happening in CFTR mutation, the patient with cystic fibrosis will lose this CTT sequence. And because of that, this particular position, F508, will form a new base sequence like ATC, ATT, GGT, and GTT. There is a loss of ATC and TT code. But the amino acid remains the same, isoleucine, because both ATC and TT are coding for isoleucine amino acid. And that is what we check here. Next slide, please. Over to Dr. Sujay.
Thank you, Dr. Saurabh. Okay, now the next case is about non-obstructive azoospermia. Please see this analysis report. You see there is azoospermia, see the volume and the pH. Please. Next, please. Yeah, see the volume and the pH are normal. So we are dealing with a case of non-obstructive azoospermia. Next, please. So remember, we sometimes rely on FSH and testicular size, and we say that if there is high FSH and the testicles are very small, there is no chance you can get the sperm. But remember, these are very poor predictors. Sometimes men with very high FSH and very low testicular size, you can get the sperms. On the other hand, men with normal FSH and very large testes, sometimes you may not be able to get any sperms. So the studies have shown that there is no reliable predictor which can predict whether sperms will be obtained from this man or not. So until you do the surgical sperm retrieval, you cannot tell the man, okay, so you cannot become father, or there is guarantee that we can get the sperms from your testicle. But there is one test which is very much reliable, that is AZF mutation, that is Y chromosome microdeletion. And remember, we will discuss it later on. There are different types of Y chromosome microdeletion, but there is AZF-A and AZF-B deletion. The chance of obtaining sperm is near to 0. So if there is other type of AZF deletion like AZF-C or D, in that case you can go for surgical sperm retrieval. But on the other hand, if there is AZF-A or AZF-B deletion, you should not go for surgical sperm retrieval. Next, please. Now remember, sometimes we see the man was advised FNAC, and after FNAC it was shown that sperm's presence or absence. Remember, FNAC does not make any sense because FNAC is done from the dried and the fixed tissue. So FNAC cannot comment about the quality of sperm, motility and morphology. So you should do the trial TESA. That is, you should do the TESA as a part of a diagnostic purpose. That is called diagnostic TESA. And if the sperms are obtained, the embryologist can be able to comment on the quality of sperms. And if adequate quantity of sperms are obtained, this can be frozen for future use. So please do not advise FNAC, rather send the patient for diagnostic TESA. Next, please. So this is a real case example. Again, I have taken permission from the patient to upload this picture. This is a picture of a 34-year-old male who presented with azoospermia. On examination, you see there is gynecomastia, there is poorly developed secondary sex character, there is no there is no body hair, and you find the typical eunuchoid, the body habitus, the arm and the limb lengths are higher than the trunk length, and the genital organ is rarely visible. And see the karyotyping report, it's showing the 47XXY. So this is the example of Klinefelter syndrome. Next slide, please. Please, Dr. Saurabh, please take over.
Yeah. So as Dr. Sujay has mentioned, Klinefelter syndrome. So this is being very easily done through karyotyping. So karyotyping is a very common test used in all the cytogenetics lab. Very, very important and a common test. How it is done, I wanted to show in this particular picture. So in this case, we have to take a sample, and a sample will be a blood, bone marrows, and tissue, or any type of sample. But we are talking about infertility, so we'll be talking about the blood sample. So we have to take a blood sample. We have to set up the culture using certain medias. Commercially available medias are also available. Then we have to add PHA, which is also called as phytohemagglutinin, which helps the cells to divide. So we have to culture the cells outside the body and to get a maximum metaphases. Maximum metaphase means we have to have a good chromosomes, good grown chromosomes, and we have to incubate the culture for 2 to 3 days in 37 degrees centigrade incubator. And then we have to add a colcimid. The colcimid is the cell growth arresting agent, or you can also call it a cell growth inhibitor. So this colcimid will break the cell cycle, and then the cells will be arrested. The cells will be arrested in the metaphase stage, or a M phase, also called as M phase, and then it has been transferred to a tube, a centrifuge tube. The tube, in tube, we have to add a hypotonic solution. Hypotonic solution will help the cells to grow or swollen properly, and then we have to fix the cells with the help of Carnoy's fixative. The commonly used fixative is methanol and acetic acid in the ratio of 3:1. We have to centrifuge it and then drop the swollen cells in the chilled slide, the glass slide, and then the cells will be broken off, and all the metaphases and the chromosomes will be spread properly. We have to then stain it with the Giemsa. The commonly used stain is Giemsa. Few people are using Leishman as well, but we are using Giemsa here. And then we have to put the slide under the microscope to see the chromosomes or metaphases, and then we have to karyotype it. So karyotyping is done through digital softwares. The software will help us to identify the chromosomes and arrange it in a banding pattern. Next slide, please. And this is how it looks, typical chromosomes after banding. So banding through Giemsa stain. And then you can see this is a abnormal metaphase or abnormal karyotype of a Klinefelter syndrome patient. You can see extra X chromosome. Extra X chromosome represent that there are 47 number of chromosome instead of 46, as we all normal people will have 46 chromosome. the Klinefelter syndrome patient will have extra X chromosome, which makes XXY karyotype. Next slide, please. Okay. Please allow me for a few more minutes to discuss about microarray analysis. So microarray analysis is something, a very advanced technology, which is available right now. It is available in our laboratory as well. So the basic principle of microarray is we have to take a patient sample, we have to take a reference sample or a control sample. We have to tag it with the fluorescent dye and then mix it and put it in a microarray chip. The chip contains a target DNA, the genes for the genes which we want to study. So these genes are having a denatured DNA with the single strand, and when we denature our sample, it will go and tag with the corresponding gene target and then show a signal. The signals will be in the form of different colors, like you can see four basic colors: yellow, green, red, and white. White means there is nothing, no change. Yellow means there is gain of genetic material. Green is absolutely duplication, and red is a loss of genetic material, also called as deletion. And the other hand side, you can see a panel which shows this is called as SNP microarray, or single nucleotide polymorphism microarray, which is the most advanced technology available right now. And this is what we are using in our lab. This is Affymetrix platform. Here, the basic principle behind this is to take a sample DNA, we have to denature it. We have to put a primer, DUTP incorporation, modified DUTP DNA with the fluorescent tag, and then we have to load in the chip. The bottom side of the picture, you can see the chip, which contains the glass chip, which contains the target DNA, and we have to put the sample, we have to wash it, and then again see the signals. The signals will be in the form of computer generated data, and then we have to analyze it and comparing with the different databases. Next slide, please. So this is a karyo view, a virtual karyotype generated by a microarray system. It can detect some microscopic copy number variations like Y chromosome microdeletion. So Y chromosome microdeletion, as Dr. Sujay was also mentioning, that it is very important to see AZF genes, AZF A, B, and C genes. So these genes can be easily detected through microarray. But why we have to go for Y chromosome deletion by PCR or any other method? Because PCR is a very, very commercially viable test. Microarray is a little bit costly. And if you are not sure that, yeah, the patient will have Y chromosome microdeletion, and suppose a Y chromosome microdeletion PCR has come out as negative, karyotyping is also negative, then this is the test to be considered to see whole genome analysis if there is any particular gene deletion or gain is available in the patient or not. So this karyo view, you can see at the bottom, Y chromosome shows a red colored triangle, a downturn. So this downturn shows that there is a loss of Y chromosome, this particular loci. Next slide, please. And this is a detailed view of that particular part of Y chromosome. You can see the red color indicates that the purple color shows that with the reference file that there is a spermatogenic failure. And we have found a deletion in the DAS gene. So DAS gene, DAZ gene, is consisted of AZF genes, AZF alpha, AZF beta, and AZF C. So we have found a deletion in the DAS gene in this patient, and the report has gone as Y chromosome microdeletion. Next slide, please. Yes, over to Dr. Sujay.
So before we move to the next, sorry to disturb here. Before we move to the next case studies, would like to quickly give a time reminder. We are already crossed 15 minutes. So would request both the speakers to quickly cover the remaining topics so that we can take the queries also.
Okay, yeah. Okay, sure. So you can see the next slide. It's basically another case example. See, here the karyotype is absolutely normal. Hello?
Yeah, it is audible.
Yeah. So see, here the karyotype is absolutely normal. But in this case, you see that the Y chromosome microdeletion, there is some Y chromosome, some genes are deleted. So this is the report. Actually, we have sent the patient to the Dr. Lal's Path lab for doing this test. Okay. So Y chromosome microdeletion testing is important. Otherwise, even when the sperms are obtained, there is high chance that Y chromosome microdeletion can be transmitted from the father to son, and the son may be azoospermic, or again at birth, the son may suffer from some conditions like testicular maldescent like undescended testes or hypospadias. Over to Dr. Saurabh.
Yeah. Next slide, please. So Y chromosome microdeletion, I'll go very quickly. So Y chromosome is very small chromosome, as we have seen in the karyotype picture. And you see that there is this map shows that AZF gene is located in YQ11.2 region, which is subdivided into 3 particular loci, AZF A, B, and C. And if you see, AZF C is more frequently deleted in the azoospermic patient. Next slide. Yeah, so AZF A, AZF B, and AZF C, you see the size of the AZF A is very small, 1 MB, AZF B is 6.2 MB megabase, and AZF C is 3.5 MB. And these are the particular STR markers which are tagged with this loci, which has been designed in the PCR primer. And these are the loci available with the kits, what we use. Next slide. So what is happening in AZF-C deletion? So you see that from B2 to B4, there is a recombination happens, and whatever the coding regions in between, this green, red, yellow color arrow, what you see, these are all deleted. Because the size of this particular gene is 3.5 MB, the loss is very big, and because of that, the problem occurs. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. And this is how the PCR gel picture looks like. And you see in the right hand side, AZF-A has this particular STR markers. All these markers are listed here. The yellow box shows that there is a loss of this band, and C corresponds to control. The control shows a band, whereas the sample S is a sample. Sample shows a loss of band, and all these markers are actually deleted. And all these markers are corresponding to AZF-C regions. Next slide. Over to Dr. Sujay.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Saurabh. This is a real case, and with all these investigations of this patient was done from Lalspet, where I have sent the patient. Okay, this is a patient with azoospermia, 40 years old male, and on karyotyping, you see there is translocation between 14 and 21 chromosome. We advised the man, then you can consider donor sperm, that he was adamant, then no, I want to become biological father, either it can be done or we cannot accept the donor sperm. So next slide, please. We have done the Y chromosome microdeletion from the same lab, and see Y chromosome microdeletion was normal, that is there was no deletion. So what can you do if there is chromosomal or genetic abnormality, but the man refuses to use the donor sperm? Can you force the man to go for donor sperm? No, there is some way out. Next, please. In this case, either you can do sperm aneuploidy testing by fish, that is, sometimes it can happen the mutation or the chromosomal abnormality only could have affected the somatic cells. It might not have affected the germ cells. So you could test the sperms collected from the ejaculate or from the testicle by fish, fluorescent in situ hybridization. Or even if this is found, you can go for PGT-SR, that is pre-implantation genetic screening. That is, if you go for the ICSI and embryo is formed, then you send the embryo for biopsy and see which embryo contains the genetic defect, and the embryos which are not containing the genetic defects, only those embryos are suitable for transfer. Next, please. So in this man, next please, we send the patient, we have done the trial TESA, and on the day of trial TESA, we have requested one person from their lab, Lalspet lab, to come, and they come and they collected some samples from the testicular sperms, and they have done the sperm fish, and on examination you see there was no aneuploidy found in the testicular sperm. So we have done the ICSI, his wife conceived, but unfortunately this couple miscarried in the early trimester. Next slide, please. So Dr. Saurabh, please.
Yeah, so this is very simple method as we use in a routine fish test. So we have to take a sperm sample, we have to wash it with culture media, fix it with the Carnoy fixative, put the sperms in a slide, decondense it, hybridize it, hybridizing using probes, the target probes, and then we have to detect the signals and do the analysis. The only limitation of this sperm aneuploidy fish is that we have a limited number of chromosomes being studied here. Unlike microarray, we can study all 46 chromosomes, entire chromosomes in a high resolution way. We can study only few chromosomes here. And if there is not enough spermatozoa available, then it will be difficult to estimate the risk of aneuploidy as well. Next slide, please. So this is the panel which includes different chromosomes. The major chromosomes we have included in this panel. You see the sex chromosome. So if there is XXY, Klinefelter, triple X syndrome is also there, XYY is also there, And if there is a loss of X chromosome, it will be a Turner syndrome. There are different autosomal chromosomes are also included here in this panel. Chromosome 8, which correspond to early loss of the pregnancy. 16 correspond to the spontaneous abortion, 13 we know Patau syndrome, 18 is Edwards syndrome, and 21 we know that Down syndrome. So all this cocktail of the probes being used in this particular FISH test, and we are using different color 4 chromosome FISH for detecting aneuploidy. Next slide, please. This is a sweet picture we have taken from our case data that these are the normal sperms. You can see different colors very properly visible. So chromosome 13 correspond to red color, 18 is for aqua, 21 is green, chromosome X is blue, and chromosome Y is for yellow color. So if you see single color in each sperm for corresponding to each chromosome, we can call it as normal. Next slide, please. The abnormal sperm looks like this. So you have a 2 disomy. So always we remember that unlike our normal cells, which will have only single chromosome, because these are in the disomy stage. So in a normal condition, there should be a single chromosome 13, but in this patient we have seen 2 chromosome 13 signal, 2 chromosome 21 signal, and there are certain Y chromosome, extra Y chromosome. So these are abnormal sperm. Next slide, please. Yeah, over to Dr. Sujay.
Yeah. So we have come to the fag end. Okay, so next slide, please. This is because male infertility discussion is incomplete unless we discuss something about the ejaculatory dysfunction. This is a real case. All these are basically real case, whatever we both have discussed. This is 38-year-old college teacher. He was able to ejaculate initially, but after she has been diagnosed with diabetes, he lost the ability to ejaculate. Neither he could ejaculate during masturbation, nor during intercourse. And so the physical examination unremarkable. We tried vibroejaculator, it failed, and on post-masturbation urine, we did not find any sperm. Next, please. Next, please. So on transrectal ultrasound, we found that there were obstructive changes, that is secondary obstructive changes because of diabetes. Please remember, sometimes diabetes can lead to ejaculatory dysfunction apart from erectile dysfunction in forms of seminal vesicle obstructive changes. Next, please. So we have done the TSIC and they delivered. So remember, when we are dealing with ejaculatory dysfunction, we have to rule out diabetes, spinal cord injury, and neurological diseases, and obstruction, of course. Some medications can be helpful, but they are not as great as it seems to. Of course, we have to exclude the retrograde ejaculation by testing for post-masturbation urine. Next. So these are the common medication. Next, please. Common medications used for ejaculatory purpose, but most often they are not helpful. So ultimately, you have to decide on, you have to rely on the post-masturbation urine. If sperms are obtained, fine. Otherwise, you have to go for TSIC by collecting the sperms from the testicle in these cases. So in a nutshell, next please. Next. So semen analysis should be done from reliable laboratories which are following the WHO rules. If a single analysis is abnormal, we should repeat it. Antioxidants should be can be offered in mild male factors. In severe male factor, please remember, donor sperm is not the only option, but active investigation should be done. So whatever we have discussed is mainly about the active investigation in case of severe male factor infertility. So thank you. I request Dr. Saurabh to give his concluding remarks on this.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and it was very nice information given by Dr. Sujay. I have discussed about the test corresponding to all the condition, and we have all the tests available in our laboratory. Any information you require regarding the test, please you can contact me. Next slide we can show. Yeah, these are the tests available: sperm DNA fragmentation with tunnel microscopy. Next slide. And this is Y chromosome microdeletion test details. Next slide. Yeah, so we have all the tests available in our lab, and over to audience, over to moderator. If there is any question, we'll be happy to answer.
So I would request all the participants, this was a very energetic session by Dr. Sujay and Dr. Saurabh. Even though we have surpassed by 20 minutes, but I can still see the same number of participation which was there. So I would request each one of you to post your queries in the chat board so that one by one we can answer. Though as of now, we have received 2 queries so far. So I think Himanshi is going to take up the queries.
Yes, sir. So the first question that we have The first question is the tunnel assay approximate or is it an accurate calculation?
Yeah. So none of the assay is accurate, I would say. So there are certain publications available which say that SCD, sperm chromatin dispersion test, or tunnel assay, both are equally sensitive, almost 85 to 87%. None of these tests are 100% available, but these are very commonly used in all the labs, and this is best way to find out the sperm DNA fragmentation. The calculation is accurate, yes, depending on the sperm collection. Sometimes, the sperm collection is not done properly, and if it is not frozen properly, not maintain the temperature, and if it is traveling from the far space to the lab, then the calculation may vary. So depending on that, we should be very careful while collecting the sperm and transporting it. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So the second question that we have is from Dr. Avinash, which is there any treatment available for SDF?
Yeah, regarding SDF, unfortunately, there is no definitive treatment. We can do the lifestyle changes if there are causative factors like infection, smoking, the changes of sedentary lifestyle, because prolonged sitting can also be responsible for sperm DNA fragmentation. Varicocele, as I have mentioned, if this fulfills all the criteria for surgical correction, it should be corrected. If there is infection, evidence of infection, it should be checked. It should be treated. And lastly, ICSI is the treatment of choice, as Dr. Saurabh has already mentioned. If there is more than 30% DFI, ICSI is the treatment of choice. But sometimes, even during ICSI, if you find that the quality of sperm is very poor, in that case, you can harvest the sperm from the testicles and do the TESA, and from those TESA sperm, you can do the ICSI.
Thank you, sir. Next question that we have is from Dr. Nirja. From Y chromosome microdeletion donor sperm is the only answer?
Not certainly. If there is AZFA and AZFB microdeletion, in that case, of course, donor sperm is the only option, unfortunately. But in other types of Y chromosome microdeletion, as Dr. Saurabh has nicely detailed, like AZFC, AZFD, this type of microdeletion, there is good chance that you can get fair quantity of sperms from the testicles. So not necessarily any type of Y chromosome microdeletion is not the indication of donor sperm. So you have to classify which type of Y chromosome microdeletion is there.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. So the next question that we have is from Dr. Manoj. The question is stability of sperm for sperm DNA fragmentation.
Yeah, as I already mentioned, that the sample should be fast frozen. If there is a gel pack available, it should be frozen very fast. Otherwise, because of temperature variability, the sperm will be damaged. It will show a false positive result as well. So it is very important to collect the sperm in a good condition, in the sterile condition. It should not be bacterially infected, and then it should be transported very well to the lab. So that is very important to understand.
Thank you, sir. So the next question that we have is from Dr. Dheeraj. The question is, how reliable is lycopene in male infertility?
Well, as I mentioned, it's basically antioxidant. So it's useful because, as we have discussed, that there is always tug of war between oxidants and antioxidant. But remember, sometimes we see this type of antioxidants over. Mild factor can give lycopene or any other type of antioxidant is same. All are basically same. So there is no evidence that some type of antioxidant is better than other. You can give antioxidant over the period of 3 months and then repeat the semen analysis. But you should not give antioxidants for years after years, because sometimes, particularly as I mentioned, if there is severe male factor infertility, you can give antioxidant, but don't rely on antioxidant only, and don't think that after giving antioxidant everything will be normal. So you have to aggressively investigate and go for treatment, because prolonged use of antioxidants, because there has been a publication in the Fertility Sterility by Dr. Ashok Agarwal, which they have shown that particularly in varicocele associated infertility, some oxidative stress is required for spermatogenesis. So if you aggressively give antioxidants, sometimes it can be harmful. In a nutshell, in mild male factor infertility, you can give antioxidants for 3 months and then see the report. If severe male factor, you can give antioxidant, but don't rely on it wholeheartedly.
Thank you so much, sir. So we're done with the Q&A session. Over to Dr. Sankar.
Okay. Thank you very much to both the speakers. I think we got a last questions now. If a person having treatment, how much time required to stop medicine and collect sample?
Sorry, I stop. You don't need to stop medicine. After, as I have mentioned, that you can collect the sample. If there is mild male factor, you can collect the sample after 3 months. If there is severe male factor, you should repeat it as soon as possible. So there is no need to stop the treatment at that point of time.
So thank you everyone. This recording of this webinar will also be shared on your email IDs along with the also will be posted on our LinkedIn page as well as our Facebook page. So the links will be shared with you in case at all you have any queries which is left unanswered, which will be answered by the speakers directly if you write it to us. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks for your time. Thank you both the speakers.
Thank you, Dr. Sujay. It was very nice and
Yeah, thank
informative.
you, Dr. Saurabh, and thank you all the participants. Thank you, organizers. It's a very nice and interactive session. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, all the participants. Thank you. Bye.